brown skin girl. Your skin just like pearls. The best thing in the world. No change for anybody else in the brown skin girl. Your skin just like pearls. The best thing in the world. I never change it for anybody else in. She says she really work for like me. Don't believe in nothing but the Almighty. Just a little jeans and a pure white tee. She never did ever be nobody wifey. Yeah, she wanna be not pretty but your heart is a mess. Play you like a villain cause she caught in a way. Tonight I am walking away. 9 to 5 mine and a grind. Tonight I might fall in love. Depending on how you hold me. I'm glad that I'm calming down. Can't let no one come control me. Keep dancing and call it love. She fights it by falling slowly. If ever you are in doubt, remember what mama told me. Brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. Your back against the world. I never tried you for anybody else. Brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. The best thing in the world. I never trade you for anybody else. Like a trophy when Naomi's walking. She need an Oscar for that pretty dark skin. Pretty like Lupita when the camera's closing. Drip uncle everyone my Kelly's rolling. I think tonight she might pray her praise. Melanin too dark to call her shade. She minds her business and winds her ways. Roll like 24K. Okay. Tonight I might fall in love. Depending on how you hold me. I'm glad that I'm calming down. Can't let no one come control me. Keep dancing and call it love. She fighting but falling slowly. If ever you are in doubt, remember what mama told me. Brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. You're back against the world. I never tried you for anybody else. Brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. The best thing in the world. I never tried you for anybody else. Can't ball in a life, man. Go on with it, go on with it. Yeah, easy. Are you kidding me? Force, yeah. So we are coming here with a force, yeah. Blessings we are reaping, we coursing on. We not rise and boast. Yeah, we give thanks like we need it the most. We have to give thanks like we really supposed to be thankful. Blessings all come like fun. My thank God for the journey, the earnings, not just for the plus. Yeah, and gratitude is a must. Yeah, we see blessings fall by my right hand. What's that toast to the friends that take off the load? One time, kids sit down in a class and we board them. Only set the road and we go on with the road. Third form, me say me try a thing. And you know it formed up to be a fire king. Now up on stage with credit, say I sing, yeah, see me all thing, you soon get the higher ring. Like, hello, brother, say I had to shut ya. Saw your poster, spectacular photo. Keep it burning, yes, that's the motto. If you need a butter, pass through your soul to can't buy in a life, man. Me have to thank God for the journey, the earnings, not just for the plus. Yeah, and gratitude is a must. Yeah, we see blessings fall, I'm right on. What's that to us to the friends that take off the load? One time, kids sit down in a class and we board them. Only set the road, them go on with it, go on with it. That's how our blessings upon me. And send me to tell them the story. That's how our blessings upon me. And that's how I'm gonna give him the glory. I'm delighted. Janos and me personally united. Got the music, me excited. Coming like a potion. Blessings all for my life. But thank God for the journey, the earnings, not just for the plus. Yeah, gratitude is a must. Yeah, me see blessings fall by my right hand. But I don't see the friends that take off every load. One time, kids sit down in a class and we board them. Only set the road and we go on with the road. To us, to us. We not rise and boast. Yeah, we give thanks. We have to give thanks like we really supposed to. Thankful. Blessings all from life and but thank God for and see blessings fall. Right and was a toast to the friends that take off the load. One time kids sit down in a class and we pour them. Only set the road and we pour with the road. Toast. Oh yeah. So much blessings on me. So much blessings on me. Oh yeah. Blessings on me. Yeah. So much blessings on me. Oh yeah. Blessings on me. So much blessings on me. Yeah. Blessings on me. I almost lost my life today, but I was not strong. Yeah. I know my faith stands strong. There's so many negative, but don't let it stop you. Yeah. Seek out success and success will find you. What if they put up a wall to stop you in your tracks? Some people mission in life is to hold you back. But everyone tell you who win. But you must never give up fighting. Man will always be righteous. Cause he keeps on raining blessings all over me. So much blessings on me. He keeps on raining blessings all over me. So much blessings on me. He keeps on raining blessings all over me. So much blessings on me. He keeps on raining blessings all over me. So much blessings on me. God is always faithful, and I believe it, oh yeah. To deliver you from evil, and not mine into the trouble, yeah. Never lose your hope, no matter what, yeah. Never forget, hey. Oh, you go away, and where you go away, and what you do away. Just know that God is in charge. Only time you looking for, only time you want to receive, only time you want to want to receive. Blessings all over me, so much blessings on me. He keeps on raining blessings all over me, so much blessings on me. Jah keeps on raining blessings all over me, so much blessings on me. He keeps on raining blessings all over me, so much blessings. I got it on you. Love you real to me. Real to me. You know it all that. True to myself. True to my heart. Bring it for real. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining YP4's second civic engagement training. My name is CC Battle, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. So I want to know in the chat, who was here for our first training last week? Go ahead and give me some exclamation points in the chat. If you were here, yes, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us again. So there's some folks that I can see that weren't here last week, so you may not know who YP4 is. So I want to just give you a quick background. So Young People 4 is a social justice incubator. We provide lifelong social justice leadership training to unlock the potential of young people who have been historically left out of opportunity. We are a national network that centers Black, Brown, Indigenous, LGBTQIA, and differently abled folks in education, media, politics, business, government, and everywhere. For us, the core of social justice is civic engagement, which is why we ingrain it into every aspect of our work. So this training is a part of a larger campaign called Building Power to Win that aims to train folks from across the country to center civic engagement in their communities by centering the issues that they care about. So just so you know, this one is a series, and this is the second one of the series, and the goal is to break down each level of government, as you can see here on the screen, to explore what's at stake for our communities, but using COVID-19 as a real-time case study. So all of these trainings will culminate, y'all, in a banging, free, national civic engagement summit during the first week of August, which you can see right here. Give me some exclamation points if you're excited about the summit. Yes, free. Thank you, Josh. Yes, give us some exclamation points. And this summit will allow us to dig deeper into some of the conversations that we'll start here today. We hope that you all can join us. We would love to see you. As you can see from the agenda, we're gonna have DJ sets and performances, all types of great stuff. So before we get started, let's set some community agreements, AKA ground rules, so that we can all benefit from this space.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Andrea Sosa. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So before we get into community agreements, I want to go over some of the functions of this training. So we have a couple of functions that you all can see on your screen. The first one is a Q&A function. That's at the bottom of your screen. This is a chance for you to ask questions throughout the training, and we will do our best to answer them throughout the time that we have together. There's also a chat function, which a lot of you are using right now. This is a space for you to interact with other folks in the training and also to interact with us. We'll be asking you questions, so giving us some reactions and some answers. This will be the space to do it. We will also, whenever you participate, just make sure that you are sending a message to panelists and attendees so everybody can see your message. And we're going to be dropping some definitions throughout the training in here, so make sure to be on the lookout for the chat as well. We also have, we're going to have a couple of polls, so make sure to participate in those. That's an interactive feature that we're going to be having, and also closed caption. There's a option at the bottom of your screen to turn on your closed captioning. If you need closed captioning throughout this training, make sure you do that. We also are going to, this training is live streamed, so we're going to be live streaming on YouTube, which is also going to be available after this training for you all to see the recording. And it's going to be, we're recording all of this as well. So now let's review some community agreements. So the first one is expect unfinished business. As you all know, the folks that attended the previous training, we are going to cover a lot, and there may be conversations that we won't have time to really dig into. But the goal is to provide you with the baseline information for you to continue these conversations and this exploration even beyond this training. The second one is please be respectful in the chat. We want this space to be, respectful for everybody and a space that everybody can benefit from. So that being said, if anyone is intentionally causing harm in the chat, we will remove you from the training. The third one is ask questions. Q&A, make sure that you're using this function to ask your questions, participate in the live polls. They're really fun. And so everybody is placed on mute right now. But if you do have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the Q&A. And if you want to share anything in the chat, feel free to do so. All right, so another thing, please feel free to use social media throughout this training. Here are our social media handles. Tag us on Instagram and Facebook and all the things. Another really fun surprise that we have for all of you attending is we are going to be doing another giveaway. Some of you might have seen that we did a giveaway for the previous training. You will have a chance to win a really cool Michelle Obama sweatshirt from the Becoming Tour. And we'll give you details at the end of the training on how to participate. And so before we get started, I really quickly want to review the agenda of what we're going to go over today. We're going to be starting off with a Civics 101. Then we're going to be having an awesome guest speaker, State Senator from Tennessee, Ramesh Akbari. And from there, we're going to talk about how to use the framework that YP4 uses and go into a Q&A session. So before we get started, let's do some introductions. So if you are able in the chat, let us know your name, your location, your pronouns, and if this is your first training, let us know what you're excited about. If this is your second training, let us know a key lesson that you learned from last week that you want to share with folks. Make sure that you are sending your messages to all attendees. There's a drop-down little section where you can make sure that you're doing that. And as you all do that, we are going to get started with a quick survey. The answers to these questions will actually be anonymous, so we won't share them publicly, but we're going to go ahead and get started with this survey to get your opinions on some things. So you can go ahead and see the first survey on your screen. Go ahead and participate. We'll give you all a couple of seconds to do that. All right, wonderful. So we're going to close this poll and we're going to move on to the second survey question. See y'all participating. Let's see, who do we have coming in from the chat? Charles Bush from South Dakota. Hey, Charles. Hey, y'all. Awesome. We're going to go ahead and close this poll and start the next one. We have Josie from Hampstead, New York. Savannah Mendoza from Sacramento. Excited to be engaging college students in California to get out the vote on their campuses. Yes. Let's do it. All right, let's go ahead and close this poll and move on to the next one. All right, and this is our last poll. Make sure you participate. Awesome, let's go ahead and close this poll. Thank you all so much for participating. This information is really useful for us and we're excited to be here with you all. So with that, thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat and let's go ahead and get started.
All right, just want to point out really quick, we see some of you all talking about that you have issues with closed captioning. Friendly reminder, shoot it directly to the panelists so we can see it and workshop it instead of to the main group so we can make sure we leave that space for any reactions and questions. All right, let's jump into it. So the purpose of this training is to provide y'all with the framework to censor civic engagement in your work and in your communities so that we can create wins. We know that the democracy in this country was never made to include us and our communities. In fact, it was intentionally created so that we don't participate. If you know that, go ahead and drop some exclamation points. Yes. The purpose of this training is to provide y'all with a framework to censor civic engagement so that we can create wins in whatever way that looks for your communities. So we know that democracy in this country was never made to include us in our communities, but it's intentional that they want to make sure that we do not participate. It's important to note that we have been taught that the issues that impact us every day are separate from the political process, which is not true. But today we'll challenge this notion and provide you all with the framework for how to merge the issues that you care about with voting, while censoring the needs of your community. So I want you all in the chat, go ahead and give us some ideas, some examples, like why are you here? What do you want to learn? What's really important to your community so we can make sure that we pull it into the chat, to the conversation today. So I want to be clear, we are not here to tell you who to vote for or how to vote because we are totally nonpartisan. But we want you to have as much information as possible to be able to mobilize your communities in whatever way makes sense. So in the last training, we broke down how we participated in 2016, and that was a presidential election. And we also talked about how young people are officially the largest voting bloc, meaning we have the power to shift every election if we wanted to. Does anyone remember the percentage of young people that voted in 2016? I want y'all to go ahead and drop that in. Yes. Keep going. $30 to $40. Okay. Okay. Awesome. 49%. How do y'all feel about that? Too low. I know we can do better. Absolutely. So only 49%. All right, we're going to move to the next slide really quick. So in 2016, let me show y'all. In 2016 was just like 2020. It was a presidential election. We were voting for the president, all 435 seats of the House, 34 seats of the Senate, 14 governorships, 44 states held local legislative elections, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So who remembers how many folks were eligible to vote in 2016? Yes. So there was over 200 million folks that were eligible to vote. And out of that number, over 65 million of those were young people. So again, we are the largest voting bloc and we only turned out at 49%. All right, so now we're gonna talk about 2018. All right, so in 2018, which was the midterm election, 35 of the 100 Senate seats were up. All 435 seats of the House were up, but this is the important part that we're gonna get in today. 39 state and territory governorships were up for election. Did y'all know that? No? Okay, yeah. So we're gonna talk about it. So in 2018, there were over 200 million eligible voters. So how many eligible voters do you think were young people? Give me some guesses in the chat. Okay, close. Okay, I see 64 million. Yes, so it was over 66 million. So keep in mind, this is a million more eligible voters than in 2016, which means we were more of a large voting bloc, right? So I want to do a quick poll with you all really quick. So of all of the eligible voters in 2018, what percentage do you think turned out? So remember, in 2016, it was 49%. Okay, I'm gonna give y'all about 20 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna give y'all 10 more seconds. All right, let's display y'all's results. Okay, y'all are saying 38%. Okay. Dang, y'all are good. Yes, 38%. Yes, 38% in 2018 turned out. So remember, let's put this in perspective. So we had a million more eligible voters and we turned out less than we did in 2016. So what do y'all think the percentage was for folks 65 and older? Take a shot in the chat. How do you think older people, so 65 plus, turned out in 2018? Dang, y'all said 70, you think it was a lot, 80, okay, boom. So it was 66%. So again, let's put this in perspective. Young people, as you can see in this graph here, were massive, right? So many of us, we performed at 38%, whereas 65-year-olds and older, they're almost half of our population and they turned out at 66%. How do y'all feel about the way we turned out? Yeah, absolutely. But it's okay. It may suck, but we have a cure. All right, next slide. So I know you're thinking, so why don't we vote? And someone said it in the chat, they understand the implications, right? So there's many reasons why us as young people, we don't participate, right? And many have to do with voter suppression tactics. So we hear about things like voter ID laws, closing polling places, but let's do another poll really quick. So what do you all think was the #1 reason folks didn't vote in 2016? And for folks who came last week, y'all know the answer, but I want to see other folks, what y'all are thinking. All right, let's go ahead and show the results of that poll. Yes, so I can, yes, y'all see, and y'all know, you're like, oh yeah, we didn't like the candidates. Absolutely. The #1 reason where young folks gave in 2016, and we can argue that they didn't change very much in 2018, was they didn't like the candidate. But though this is maybe true, we believe that the core reason why we didn't participate is because the issues that impact us every day are communicated as being separate from the political process, which impacts our ability to show up when we don't identify with the candidate. So this is not our fault. I know it's really easy to be like, oh, why didn't we show up? But this is a result of an intentional strategy that aims to ensure that we don't make the connections so we don't participate. Because remember, we are the largest voting bloc, y'all, and we can shift every election if we wanted to. So let's think about what we hear, which further doubles down on why we don't want to participate. Traditional get out the vote campaigns focus on things like vote, it's your civic duty, vote for X and X candidate. Have y'all heard this messaging? And I know folks that were here last week were like, yeah, we heard that. How do y'all feel about that messaging? Yeah, I see the comments. Yeah, we know it doesn't work for us. This touch and go type of communication doesn't work for our communities for a couple of reasons. One, our communities are worried about immediate needs like paying rent, protecting themselves from police violence, or staying safe from COVID, right? Two, it doesn't connect the elections to our immediate needs. And three, it doesn't name or acknowledge the justified reasons why we are skeptical of these institutions in the first place. As we know, the system of US democracy has never worked for a lot of the folks in our communities. So why should we trust the institution of voting or a candidate? So the thing is, this is the jam, y'all. We have to shift the conversation. We have to acknowledge the reasons why people in our communities don't, quote unquote, see how the political process impacts their day-to-day life because it's intentional. We have to expand and reframe the conversation to not just focus on the candidate, but the power of the seat. And the reason why this is really important is because the candidate will change, the power of the seat will not. So once you're able to give folks a full picture of what a seat controls and then connect it back to their life right now, it's a lot easier to connect it to a candidate because inherently they'll care about who occupies that seat. Two, it'll explain the urgency of immediate action. And three, it will explain why continued voting is critical. Because what we know for sure, and I'm sure y'all know this in y'all's communities, when you piecemeal elections, you also have piecemeal progress. So the conversation, this is what I mean, completely changes is if you said, you know what, the president has the power to appoint the head of the CDC, which is responsible for managing this pandemic and making sure we know what's happening, which is life or death for a lot of our communities. Or we can make that same connection to the local level. Like, did you know the governor has the power to determine if and how your state will reopen during a pandemic? But in order to really fully understand what's at stake for our communities and to be able to connect every election, we need to better understand how each of the different levels of government work and interact. So throughout this, chat for the next couple of minutes or so, we're going to answer a couple questions like, what is the power of elected officials? Like, how do their decisions impact our lives, especially during a pandemic? My favorite question, how do they get their money? So again, we're going to use this Civics 101 as a basics, just as a case study, so that you can see a little bit more of the bigger picture, but so you can use this as a framework to do the research in your own community. So today we're going to focus all on state government. Are y'all ready to get started? Hit some exclamation points at the chat if y'all are ready to get this popping. Thank y'all.
I see y'all are ready to get started. So like Cece mentioned, we are about to go over state government. So as you all know, similar to local government, some of you were on the training last week, state government may look different depending on which state you're in, but it holds immense power in our day-to-day lives. The structure of your state government is actually dictated by your state constitution. So it might look different, but our goal for this training will be to provide you with the general overview of the basics of state government and show you what its powers are, so you can make those connections in your own community and make the connections about the issues that you and your community care about. So let's get started by reviewing what some of those powers are. So in the chat, let us know, what are some powers that state government has? What are some things that come to the top of your head? What does state government do? What do they have the power to control? What are some of the powers that state government has? Schools, police force, education policy and funding? Yes. Appointing judges. Who said that? Riley. We're going to get to that. Roads and transportation, environmental laws, taxes, all of those things. Yes. Great responses. So let's talk about what structure this looks like. So state government dictates all of those things that you all mentioned. So everything from maintaining roads and bridges in your state, administering social services like child protective services or refugee resettlement programs, also operating state prisons and awarding private prison contracts. Those are all state government, enforcing environmental protections, managing the state court system, appointing judges, like Riley said, all of those things. Let us know what other things, keep them coming. Budget, redistricting, who said that? Lucia, we're gonna get to that as well. So what are some of the positions that you all can think of in state government? So we know what these powers are. What are some of the positions that come to mind when you think about state government? What are some of the folks that might be on a ballot? Governor, senator, reps, public service commissioners. All right, departments, Secretary of State, comptroller, assemblyman person. Yes, all of those things. So let's talk about the structure and how all of these positions fit in them. So as you all know, in state government, there are 3 branches of government. Similar to the state government, to the federal government, it's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The structure allows for, checks and balances between each of the branches to avoid any majority to dominate the decision-making process. So let's quickly review what those are. So for the executive branch, just as on the federal level, the executive branch, think of this as like the admin. So folks that manage day-to-day operations, think of like CEOs, COOs, CFOs, all of those folks. And this is comprised on the state level by the governor, any executive leaders, like some of you all mentioned, the Secretary of State, Attorney General, and also state agencies, which sometimes are called departments, depending on your state. So they're state agencies or departments. And in all states and territories, the governor is elected. Executive leaders and state agency heads can be either elected, but most of the time they are appointed by the governor. So those are the 2 ways. So then we also have the judicial branch. These are the folks that are in charge of determining whether the law is fair and just. Some of the folks mentioned judges. This is where judges sit. And there are 3 layers to it. So you have the state Supreme Court, which is the highest law of the land in the state. And then you have the Court of Appeals and the trial courts. So usually cases will start at the trial court and then can be appealed up all the way up to the Supreme Court. And 95% of all court cases in all of the country are actually seen at the state level. So they're very important. And they're the ones that make decisions about really important things in our lives. So that's the judicial branch. And then you also have the legislative branch, which these are the folks that create and pass laws. So it consists of state legislatures, which are made up of elected representatives. Some of you mentioned it in the chat. Usually there are what are called two chambers, an upper house, which you may know as the Senate, and a lower house, which you may know as the House of Representatives. So these are the two chambers that usually exist, except for Nebraska, Guam, and the US Virgin Islands. Those only have one chamber, which is a part of a single body. So these are the folks that have the power to approve state budgets, which we know is really important and we're gonna get to, determine state taxes, impeach the governor in all states but Oregon actually, and impeach state judges as well. So this is the general structure. So let's dig into it a little bit and talk about who runs this stuff and what their powers actually are. Remember, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer them.
All right. So thank you so much for that, Andrea. So now that we have the general breakdown of state government, we're going to see what this looks like in practice. So we're going to go through some roles in the state of Georgia to show you who holds some power and make some connections so that you can have a framework to look into your own state government. So as Andrea mentioned, there are some that we associate with power. We can all recognize things like governors or state senators, but there are also many roles that fly under the radar, but hold the power of some of the things that we discussed in the beginning, like determining safety measures for COVID or managing public transportation. Many of these positions are also connected to each other and work together. So we need to know who all of these people are, okay? All of them. Somebody say all of them in the chats, okay? So here you can see the full organization chart for the state of Georgia. And you can see some, all of them. And you can see some of the positions that y'all mentioned in the comments. So governor, state senator, etc. Right. So the ones that we know, we'll call them anchor roles because most of the states that we are a part of and territories have them and we associate, power with them. So let's go through some of these anchor roles, review other positions that they are tied to, and then break down what their powers are. Specifically how they use those powers during the Rona. So let's start off with the executive branch, starting with the governor. All right, so in Georgia, Governor Brian P. Kemp is the chief executive officer and commander-in-chief of Georgia. Governor Kemp functions as both the head of state, so the figurehead, and the head of government, meaning he's the highest ranking political leader. Governor Kemp is responsible for implementing state laws and overseeing operation of the state executive branch. As a fun fact, remember 2018, he was elected in 2018. It's within his power to take certain responses as a response to the pandemic. So let's look into a little bit of how he responded. So Governor Kemp ordered a statewide shelter-in-place order for all of Georgia to combat the spread of coronavirus. But he was one of the last governors to do so on April 2nd. Governor Kemp then announced on April 24th that Georgia would be reopening, beginning the first state in the entire country to do so against recommendations from both federal and state health professionals. On May 12th, he once again issued a shelter-in-place order to prevent the spread of COVID. I know y'all have lots of thoughts. I see them in the chat, but remember, we are nonpartisan, so I won't respond. All right, so among the powers of the governor is to appoint the head of different departments, as Andrea mentioned. So again, these different state departments, these are specialized departments created to oversee specific responsibilities statewide. So a state department, AKA state agencies, are overseen by agency/department heads, sometimes called secretaries, who report directly to the governor and run a particular department. So one of those departments is the Department of Public Health, okay? Anybody studying public health? Yeah? So y'all know what this is. The Department of Public Health is responsible for preventing disease, injury, and disability, promoting health and well-being, and preparing for and responding to disasters from a health perspective. Yeah, I see some of the comments. The Department of Health does this through programming focused on health. So like maternal and child health, environmental health, etc. So the Commissioner of Public Health in Georgia is Kathleen Toomey, and she was appointed by the governor. So the department, the DPH, leads Georgia's statewide response to coronavirus, including coordinating with other state agencies and the Center for Disease Control. We know that as a CDC. The DPH holds weekly calls with hospitals and healthcare leaders to provide updates on the pandemic and oversees the state's contact tracing program and runs COVID-19 testing sites across the state. This agency also publishes specific guidelines for different industries and at-risk populations to protect themselves from the spread of the virus. So another department, let's move on, is the Department of Corrections, which manages Georgia's prison system. Just so you know, is one of the largest in the entire US. The commissioner, Timothy Ward, was appointed by Governor Kemp. So the Department of Corrections has not implemented any social distancing within Georgia state prisons. The people who are being incarcerated are being kept in close quarters without a chance to socially distance and prevent the spread of the virus. And the Georgia Department of Corrections has reported that 232 staff, 715 folks who are incarcerated have tested positive. Also, the Marshall Project reported that 22 folks who are incarcerated have died from coronavirus in Georgia's prisons. And again, this is important to note because the person that oversees all of the Department of Corrections was appointed by the governor. So finally, let's jump into the Secretary of State. This is another member of the executive branch that sometimes flies under the radar. So the Secretary of State is Brad Raffensperger, whose role is to register voters, track corporate filings, grant professional licenses, and oversee the state's financial investments. The Secretary of State, y'all, is responsible for procuring new voting machines for the entire state. Do y'all remember what happened in June in Georgia? Give me some exclamation points if you remember what happened in June in Georgia. Yes, so on June 9th, y'all, Georgia had a statewide primary election which highlighted issues with the implementation of new voting machines in all of the counties across Georgia. But in Fulton in particular, multiple voting machines were reported broken on election day. And for those of you all who attended our training last week, you know all about Fulton County. So Fulton County Registration and Elections works with Georgia's Secretary of State to train poll workers to use those machines. Friendly reminder, this is another fun fact, the Secretary of State also has the power to open investigations into any election problems that may arise. Friendly reminder, the head of the secretary, this agency was appointed by who? The governor. So now let's quickly jump into the legislative branch. Something else that you all mentioned was the state legislature. So the legislature in Georgia is the General Assembly, and it has two chambers, the Senate and the House. The Senate has 56 members and the House has 180 members. Each member of the legislature represents different distinct districts, and each resident votes for their representative in their district. And we talked about districts last week. So really quick, the state senator is elected from large districts that often span several cities and counties. Remember cities and counties from last week, y'all? So there are 56 members who serve 2-year terms. In Georgia, the state Senate has the exclusive power of confirming appointments made by the governor. Exclusive power. So state representatives. So this is the larger of the two chambers within Georgia. And because each members represent smaller portions of the state. So there are 180 members, as I mentioned, who serve 2-year terms. But along with general legislative powers, the Georgia House has the exclusive power to initiate taxing legislation. So let's real quick, how did the legislature respond to the Rona? So the Georgia General Assembly has the responsibility for creating the state budget for the governor to sign. So on June 15th, the legislature returned from emergency recess due to the coronavirus to pass a state budget with over $2 billion in spending cuts due to the economic toll on the coronavirus. The legislators will determine what programs are critical to fund and what programs and departments will face deep cuts. In addition, the budget will likely redirect funding to coronavirus response efforts. So there's another very important thing that state legislature has the power to do. And I want y'all to guess in the chat. I'll give you one hint. It happens every 10 years. What do they have the power to do? Okay, I'm gonna do a little dance for y'all. Boom. Oh, yes, redistricting. So yes, it happens right after the census and it's called redistricting. For now, hold that because we're gonna talk about that a little bit later because I wanna jump into the last branch. Let's look at the judicial branch for a moment. And we talked about some of those key positions are state judges. Do y'all know what state judges have the power to do? Go ahead and drop them in the chat. If you know what the power of state judges are, what can they do? I'm gonna wait and see if I can get some responses. Okay, I see some coming in. So state court judges are responsible for overseeing criminal and civil trials. State judges hold immense power over our lives, y'all. We trust them to make some of the most important decisions that affect us. Only they have the power to grant a divorce, confirm an adoption, order the termination of parental rights, sentence a person to death, impose a sentence of imprisonment, or cause a change in property rights. State judges can either be elected or appointed. And in Georgia, they are elected for 4-year terms. Georgia Supreme Court justices and Court of Appeal judges are elected for 6-year terms. So in terms of their role for COVID-19, state courts have postponed or moved their hearings to virtual proceedings to prevent people from being forced to travel and put themselves at risk for exposure. State judges also have an additional power that they have not exercised so far, which includes the power to release people from high-risk jails and prisons to protect them from exposure and to suspend evictions. Did y'all know that state judges had the power to suspend evictions? Let us know in the chat. Right? Yeah, I see some like, no, we didn't know, right? These are just a few examples of some of the positions within the state government in Georgia and the powers that they hold. But like we mentioned, every state may look different, but they all follow this general structure. In a little bit, we'll have a special guest, Senator Ramesh Akbari, who is a part of state government, who will contextualize some of this information for us. And y'all will have the chance to ask her tons of questions. But before we get into that, let's talk about one of my favorite subjects, money. Let's get it.
All right. So now that we've gone through some case studies, thank you so much, Cece, for going through that. Let's chat about how they get their money. So we know that state governments have the power to allocate money to different services and programs and decide how much money goes where. So to give you a sense of how much money we're talking about, Georgia has a budget of over $27 billion, which is a lot of money. And a budget essentially determines the priorities of a state. So I'm going to ask y'all a question. We asked this at the previous training, but the question is a little bit different. How do state governments get their money? Let us know in the chat. What are some ways that you know state governments get their money? Taxes, yes, taxes. Federal government, fees, exactly. Good job, y'all. So local government state government gets their funding from three main sources. One, as you all mentioned, is taxes, imposing taxes like sales tax and property tax, also charging fees, like collecting money from tuition paid to state universities, payments to public hospitals, and tolls on highways and things like that, but also the federal government. The federal government allocates over $500 billion to local and state governments, which is determined by population size. Can you remind me how the federal government determines population size? The census. Yes, I know you all were mentioning the census before. The census, which is conducted every 10 years, and it is essentially a way for the government to count every single person in the United States. That includes every citizen, every non-citizen, every younger person, every older person, everybody. And it's conducted every 10 years, and we're currently undergoing the census right now. And that's going to determine how our communities are funded for the next 10 years. And these are things that are also impacted by the census. So redistricting, how district lines are drawn. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Also, how many seats each state will have in the House of Representatives. Some states will gain, some states will lose. And that will, it's called reapportionment, and how many electoral college votes each state gets. And reapportionment and the electoral college, those are things that we're actually going to address at our next training next week. So make sure to join those. Let's talk about redistricting for a little bit. So what is redistricting? So redistricting is the process of redrawing the boundaries that determine congressional districts in each state in order to balance out the population amongst districts. And we're gonna go through an example. So essentially by drawing the boundaries, state governments determine the size and makeup of a district and ultimately the power of your vote and whether or not it is represented fairly. So who's in charge of redistricting? We said it earlier. Who's in charge of redistricting? Do we know who's in charge of? I like the dance that Cece did with the state legislature. Exactly. In most states, the process for redistricting is held by the state legislature and then it's approved by the governor. So they actually work together. And some states, they have different processes, but this is how it functions in most. And in Georgia, this is how it works. So it's conducted by the state legislature, and then the governor has the power to veto it. So something happens usually when when redistricting happens, there's something that happens along with it. Does anybody know what this is? Gerrymandering, yes. So partisan lawmakers often draw districts in a way that disadvantages the opposing party, and this is called gerrymandering. And it's an intentional strategy, and this has been done by both parties. So there's actually a way for legislators to draw district lines that will decrease the power of folks in, that support the opposing party or that comprised of racial and ethnic minorities. So usually what they do is they'll either it's either packing or cracking. They pack all of the folks from the opposing party into districts so that they won't influence the rest of the districts, or they'll sprinkle them throughout the rest of the districts so that they don't gain enough power to actually win a representative. So it's wild, y'all. Let's look at an example of Georgia, actually. So let's look at how redistricting impacted elections over the past 10 years. After the 2010 elections, the state legislature was controlled by Republicans. In 2011, Georgia Republicans gained full control of the redistricting for the first time and gerrymandered the districts of Georgia. So they packed all of the Democrats into those small blue districts that you see and then sprinkled the rest throughout. But in a state like Georgia, where partisanship is actually really closely aligned with race, that meant cramming Black communities in as few districts as possible. So as you can see in these both maps, it was pretty intentional that the way that this map was created. And that was the process of gerrymandering. And this actually happens all over the country. So the same thing happened in a lot of states through a strategy that was actually called Red Map. It was created by the Republican Party. And in 2010, essentially, if you all can see what happened in 2010, there was kind of a major shift. Can someone name what happened in 2010 on this chart? So this chart essentially shows the state legislature that were controlled by either party. And in 2010, what you can see is that Republicans actually gained a lot of state legislatures. And the reason that this happened was intentional, right? Republicans shifted their focus to fund state elections because they knew that it was important, because 2012 was a redistricting year, y'all. And all of those legislators that were elected in 2010 were the ones that drew the district lines that would stay in effect for the next 10 years. So what you can see after 2010 is that Republicans continued to win elections every year after that. And it was a result because of those maps, because of those people that were elected in 2010. So all of this is going to happen again in 2022. 2022 is another redistricting year, and it will happen after the census. So that means that all of the people that were elected to governorships and state legislature chambers in the 2018 midterm elections, like Cece mentioned, and all of the folks that are going to be elected in the 2020 general elections, the presidential elections, combined, all of those are the folks that are going to be drawing the district lines that are going to be in effect for the next 10 years. So they're going to determine essentially what this map will continue to look like. And that's a big deal. They have the power to do this, and it's going to affect our community's power, not just for this year, not just for the next election, but for the next 10 years. How do y'all feel about that? Put some reactions in the chat. I know y'all are pissed off because I am. Yeah, it's wild, right? It's wild. So it just to show how much is at stake, right? So to contextualize all of this, we have a really special guest that we are excited to share with you all. And I'll have Cece introduce.
Yes, yes, yes. So please welcome Senator Ramesh Akbari, who is a state senator in the great state of Tennessee. So let's give her a second as she makes her way on. Hey, Ramesh, how are you? So y'all, don't judge Ramesh. We were having computer issues, but we're gonna bring in that amazing, that amazing look that is given us.
Okay.
Are you there?
Worked earlier. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry, y'all.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out this background thing. Let me see if I move around. It worked earlier, guys, when we did the test, but
it did. So don't worry about that. We're just gonna go straight into questions. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about what seat you hold and what power does your seat hold? Like, what does it have the power to do? Okay.
Well, I'm elected to I'm going to turn this video off till I turn this background off because it's very distracting. Someone said, okay, guys, listen, I sit in the legislature for the Tennessee General Assembly. I am in the Senate, and prior to being in the Senate, I was in the House. I was in the House for 5 years. This is my second legislative session in the Senate. It's been quite an experience, certainly. We are in the super minority, so our party has 5 seats in the Senate out of 33, and we have 25 seats in the House out of 99. So what that means is that the majority party can perform our only constitutional duty, which is to pass our state budget. Our state budget is about $40 billion per year.
Wait, what did you say? I'm sorry, your state budget is how much?
$40 billion a year.
Oh, okay, 40 billion. Okay.
Yeah. So we have about 6.5 million people in the state. So our budget is nothing compared to Texas. I mean, Texas like looks at our budget and laughs. It's crazy. But it is, someone said that is a huge differential in power dynamics. It certainly is.
Don't mind the comments. Pay attention. A lot will come in.
So for most committees, that means that there's only one Democrat on each one. So it does make it complicated when you have progressive agendas that you'd like to pass, that you're not able to kind of get the votes for. In some cases, you can't even get a second to the motion to have your bill heard, which it's rare, but it happens. But they do that to their own. So I'm not too terribly offended.
So that's a great question. And just for those watching, yes, we are nonpartisan, but she is speaking from her experience. So thinking about, you said, what type of positions do you need so that you can be successful? So like, who do you work with? Who do you have to build coalitions or alliance with to push whatever legislation that you want to pass?
So I have to build coalitions with my colleagues. Essentially, for every committee that I need a piece of legislation to move out of, I need to have some Republicans vote for it. I mean, because usually there's only one Democrat on that committee, and you cannot get a bill out of committee with only one vote. And the same thing applies when you get to the floor of the legislature. What I found is there are certain values that have bipartisan support. Okay, a lot of times there are different views about how to get to that end result. Like for instance, they want their kids, both sides of the aisle wants children to be able to go to good schools, have a good education. Some people believe that should be accomplished through private school vouchers. Other folks believe that should be accomplished through fortifying our traditional public schools. So it just, you have to kind of find a lane that you can find agreements. For me, that's been criminal justice reform. That's a big one. Fortunately, and again, the reason for wanting to get to the end result might be different. Like I'm this bleeding heart liberal who feels like people should have second chances and they shouldn't be judged by the decisions they make on their worst day. Whereas my colleagues might think, hey, our incarceration costs were $1 billion last year. So we have to get serious about how we're allocating our funds because one, it costs a lot of money. Two, we haven't seen any significant reduction in crime. So I have to build coalitions with everyone. A lot of times it's helpful to have the governor on board because the governor presents a budget to the General Assembly. If you can get your legislation funded, because that's another issue. It's not just getting someone on board to say, I think this is a good policy, but you also have to pay for it, right? So if I say, well, I think that we should have pre-K, universal pre-K across the state, you have to find money within our state budget or within a source of revenue to actually pay for that.
So how does that work in terms of you finding money? What does that process look like and who are you working in collaboration with?
So it's complicated for pieces of legislation. I know, right? Like that's the theme of my General Assembly experience. It's complicated. So for big pieces of legislation, like something like, for me, I'll give you an example of my legislation. I realized that Tennessee had the third highest cost to expunge your records out of any state. I think Texas, it was $450. Louisiana and Kentucky were the only ones that were higher than us, right? I thought, my goodness, you want to give someone a second chance, but if you don't have a job or access to income, and that's because of your criminal record, then $450 may as well be $100,000 because you don't have it and you have no means to get it. And so I met with the governor and I just explained to him about the bill. I had other advocates, a coalition that I built. I went to the leadership in the House and the Senate also to get them on board so that when the governor develops his budget, he can make it a funding priority. There are two ways you can get a bill funded. It could either be through the governor's original budget. Actually, there are three ways. Through the governor's original budget, which is a lot easier because generally, for the most part, the General Assembly will not mess with the original budget that he presents, okay? But once the budget has passed through committee, he will present an amendment. It's a supplemental, so it puts additional expenses in there, all right? If you get put in the supplemental, you're still like super excited, right? because I've never gotten in the original budget. I've always been in the supplemental. Like I've actually had a bill funded almost every year. Now those days will definitely be over because we don't have surpluses anymore, courtesy of COVID and everything else that's going on. But the supplemental budget, the General Assembly can pick things out of, and that's when you get horse trading between the House and the Senate. And they claim that it's bipartisan. It is not. The committee is bipartisan, but the work that happens before the committee is not at all. And it wasn't the case when Democrats were in charge. I saw your discussion earlier about reapportionment and gerrymandering. Yeah, the Republicans had the majority party, but not the Republicans because they weren't the majority then. Democrats were the majority across the South for 100 years. Republicans knew that it was important to invest in these races because they would determine the makeup of not just state legislatures where so much policy takes place, but also our congressional districts. They took that gamble and they won. And so so a lot of the things that they do that you say that's unfair, Democrats did the same thing when we were in power. Okay. So and the third way you can get a bill funded is you file an appropriation amendment yourself. Now, I have never seen a Democrat get an appropriation amendment filled. I've done one for the Boys and Girls Club. Now I was going to get one this year, but for COVID, they were going to donate money to redo a swimming pool in my district, a historically Black YMCA. It was going to be great. They have senior classes there, classes for kids, all that. So that's really how you get bills funded. And it's hard. You have to, I don't want to say play politics, but you have to build coalitions and you have to be someone who, I always say attacks problems and not people. So then that's someone that people want to work with.
Yeah. So before I ask my question, if you all have questions for the senator, please drop them in the Q&A button, not in the main chat. Drop them in the Q&A button now, because I'm going to go straight to your questions after I ask this question. So you pointed to something, and we're friends in real life. So, we talk about, sometimes how your position can get a bad rap, right? So what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about your seat? What's something that they should really know and understand? Because I know in my home state of Florida, some of the folks that I know that are legislators, they're like, people get on us, but we have to build coalitions. I may not agree with this person, but I'm trying to build this coalition to push this legislation for my community. And a lot of my friends who are elected, particularly in the legislature, have that opinion. Like, I wish people knew. Is there a misconception that you want the people to know, to tell their family, to understand the strategery that has to happen? Let us know.
Okay, so I tell my constituents this. I said, look, y'all sent me up there and I thought we were going to go up there and raise hell. I said, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go up there and make friends without compromising our own moral compass and the values of our district. That to me is the most important thing. Like when they do complete nonsense, I'm gonna call them out every single day. I'm not gonna say, oh, the governor's stupid. I'm gonna say, I really think that this policy he's pushing is dangerous and we should rethink it for this reason. That's a different way to articulate it. But I think that they want us to go up there and just beat up on the majority party. And there are a lot of folks who do that and they're in the news constantly. But our expression is they couldn't pass gas up there. And I have a district that needs legislation to move. They like lowering that expungement fee helped get a lot of people back to work. Okay. Passing legislation to put more money into our public schools to save them from state takeover, that directly helped my district. That was directly something that my constituents were upset about. So I think that's something that people don't realize. Like, we do have to make friends. And for me, it dawned on me, I was sitting in committee and I was actually really livid at another Democrat who's really conservative. And then I thought, he has a right to believe as he believes. And just like I have a right to believe as I believe, that doesn't mean I have to like it, but I don't have to hate him as a person, because I was ready to take my microphone and throw it across the room at him. Like, it was that bad. But, cooler heads.
So I have some questions from you. Okay, so the first question is from Grace. And they said, does your seat have either term limits or limits of term?
No, we do not have term limits. So my term is a 4-year term. So every year, and a lot of my colleagues and I say an election is a term limit. I've seen people get voted out who are not doing what they're supposed to do. It's a lot harder. And I've also seen really good people who were doing great things in their legislature have to leave because of term limits. And the unintended consequence of that is that lobbyists have so much more power because they have institutional knowledge and the legislators don't. And there's just this like there's a bill that I'm working on now that has to do with juvenile justice. I've been working on it for 6 years. If I had a term limit, there's a potential that I would be out of office and still would not be able to get that through. So yes, I run every 4 years. The House members run every 2 years. The only position, our governor is term limited. He or she, which we've never had a woman, but they can run for 2 terms and they are 4 years each. And then of course, in our cities, our mayors are term limited as well, 2 years, 4-year terms. And then the local, like city, county commissioners, those are local decisions. So they will usually pass ordinances, and they do have term limits in Memphis and Shelby County.
All right, so we have another question from Charles Bush. When it comes to coalition building, did the process exist when you got into your position? And if not, how did you manage to build that and keep the momentum going in terms of you building coalition?
Yeah, so I got elected in 2013. The Democrats had, for the most part, just lost the majority in 2010. I mean, it was very tight at that point. It was a 49-50 split in the Senate, so like 1 vote. So they really, the Senate, the House, so they had to work together. I always tell people I'm a twin, okay? Like I've been negotiating since I was in the womb, right? And I'm also from a small business. So I know like, you gotta hustle, you gotta work hard. It's about building relationships with people. And so that's kind of what I focused on. I just didn't think of any other alternative. And also I don't like to feel bad about how I treat people. And for me, like the one couple times where I feel like I've stepped out of character and been like to someone, I was actually wrong, and not just wrong, like dead wrong. So those were all 3 things that were important to me. And then I saw that you could actually get things done when you were just nice to someone. Like I don't agree with you, I don't have to take you home, I don't have to invite you over to the house for dinner, none of that, but I can agree with you on this, and it's a very narrow lane. Like we agree on this one thing. I'm not talking about anything else because otherwise I won't like you.
So to the point about coalitions, we have another question from Bay. Yes. How would you say we can form local and state coalitions as voters and constituents to help get our issues discussed and voted for? And then I'm going to merge that with a question from Olivia, and they say, how effective is contacting an elected official, calling, emails, letters, petitions? So the first question, how can we build coalitions both locally and state? And what's the most effective way to contact our state legislatures?
I got you. So I think a lot of times getting to know the elected official, and part of that could be volunteering on their campaign or going to their community events. There are some people that if you're an elected official, they're going to be at the event, they're going to speak out for a certain community, and they've built their own following because they're always there. I think another thing is to focus on issues, right? So for instance, you'll see a lot of unlikely partners come together on random stuff. Like I think an example would be when they were trying to pass some anti-meth legislation. And on the surface, it sounds good, right? But you had the AARP advocating against it because they thought they were going to have to get a prescription for their Sudafed. And so they joined and partnered up with the pharmacists and the doctors. And you're thinking, okay, all right. So I think that's important because if you focus on the shared value, you build more people and more people who they're willing to listen to. Okay. The second thing, as far as talking to elected officials, a lot of times you'll get this thing that says, email your elected official here, and you fill out this information, or call your elected official and it'll plug you directly to their office. So we get a ton of those, right? Like on a certain issue, I might get 2,000 emails in a 30-minute period on a specific issue. A lot of times it clogs up my email box, which is super annoying. And the reason why I say this is because the state only has like a certain amount of space, but it does make you pay attention. So that's one thing. You're like, this is an issue that's important. And it also makes your staff pay attention. A real effective way, though, is a handwritten note, and you need to be from that person's district.
Say that again. Why is that important? Why do you need to be from their district, Senator?
Because they represent you, and you can vote them in or out. You could even run against them, quite frankly. And even though people say, oh, they don't have a chance of winning, they still hate it when people run against them because it makes them work harder. They have to raise more money. They actually have to put a campaign out there. They have to respond and go to events. So a lot of times we'll have people run just to give that incumbent a hard time. And I'm not talking about primary them. I'm talking about like Republican versus Democrat or vice versa. But yeah, it's important to be from that person's district. And again, showing up at events, you know, they'll eventually they will have to pay attention to you and bring a group of people, right? Like Moms Demand. Okay, you know when they're there. They all wear red shirts. They don't play. They're very organized. They know who their representatives are, who their senators are. They schedule appointments. That's another thing. We had a group and I love them. They are deep within the reproductive justice world, and they have Black folks stay on the Hill. And I said, look, I want to help you, but if you don't schedule appointments with elected officials, I have like 14 appointments every day, plus 2 committee meetings. If you don't schedule appointments, you can't say they wouldn't meet with us. Did you know what I mean? Like, so I say that, like, be organized as well. And it's a full circle thing. And then also another thing I'll tell you, reach out to a legislator that you know, like a friendly, and they can host a day on the Hill for you. Like that's how it works in Tennessee. Like I hosted the day on the Hill. I hosted the day on the Hill for the Alphas, which was so random. But basically, my office just reserved the rooms for them. I did one for some leadership group through Leadership Tennessee for younger people. So that's another cool thing. So when you actually come up to the Capitol, you have a room to gather. You have a room to have lunch. They can arrange meetings with like the Secretary of State. Like that's usually what we'll do. Or you can even meet with the governor briefly. But that's just be organized about it.
I love that. So we have 4 of the same question. So it looks like I have to ask you this question, and this will be our last question. So Kimberly, AC, and Samantha said, and Delaney said, what inspired you to get into state government? Like, why? What was your why, and how the heck did you campaign? So that will be our last question. But if you have more questions for the senator, drop them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered, and we'll reach out to her separately. So give it. Tell us why. What's your why?
Let me tell you my origin story. Look, okay, Rand, I'll be quick because it's too long sometimes. But I was in 2nd grade when I decided, right back in the day. I was watching television with my parents, and I'm like, "Ooh, I want George Bush to win. I want President Bush to be reelected." And my parents said to me, "No, we're going for Clinton. We are Democrats." And I said, "Well, why?" And they said, "Because Democrats care about people." And that stuck with me. Second point, my parents refused. For whatever reason, we didn't get cable till I was in high school, which means I watched a lot of world news and basic television with my dad. And so I got real interested in all this Newt Gingrich and Congress and what is all this stuff and what's Hillary Clinton doing with this healthcare plan, all that. He explained to me he was a political science major. He's from Iran, so he's like giving all sorts of perspectives, right? And I'm like, but I'm a child. 6th grade, I saw Harold Ford Jr. get elected to Congress. He was young. He just got out of law school. He hadn't even taken the bar exam. And I'm like, wow, young people can do it. And I already knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. Fast forward, went to law school, felt like the best way that I could really make a change was to run for the state legislature. Didn't think, like, because you can have ideas, right? You can advocate, which is important. You can march, which is important. You need to get folks' attention and build coalitions, but you need a partner that was some policy change, right? So I knew I'm working for these things in the community, but if I'm actually at the table making laws, then I don't have to go through someone. I don't have to convince someone that this value is important or this is important to my community. June 2013, I went up there with my mentor, who is 90 years old. She's still in the state legislature. She is awesome, though. I mean, I'm telling you, she has more energy than most young people, more energy than me. She tells me, hey, look at that hearing room. And I'm just looking, I'm in awe. She said, listen, maybe in January, you can come shadow me. So governor announces a special election in August, and this is June. August, she calls me. She asked me if I want to run. I'm like, well, I don't live in the district. I mean, my granny lives there. My mom grew up there. I spent a lot of time there. I live right next to it. I said, no, you can still run. You just have to move in the district. I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. 7 of us ran. It was crazy. It was a special election. And that, for those of you all who don't think that every vote counts, it does. Only 1,800 people voted in a district that has 70,000 people in it. I got 500
Wait, can
votes.
you say that again? Can you say those numbers again?
Right. Only 1,800 people voted for a seat that was held by a legislative lioness. I mean, she was a history maker. First Black woman to ever be Speaker Pro Tem. Every organization I'm a member of, she was the founder of. She served in that seat for 42 years, long time, and only 1,800 people voted. And I won. I got 500 votes. I won by a 100-vote margin.
Wow.
And that was it. And let me tell you something. We worked our butt off. You want to know how we campaigned? Like crazy, okay? We knocked on doors. My mom suggested I call around to some former elected officials and try and get their support. And one guy was like, well, if she really cares about the community, she can go clean up this cemetery. It's 22 acres, y'all. 6 feet of grass. Now, you know I'm only 5'1", okay? And he said that's what she should go do. Really trying to set me up, right? So we hired this guy, and he said, okay, well, I'll cut it. Now, there's no way in hell that man could cut 22 acres of grass, but he tried. I went out there with him. The news picked up the story. They ran it for 4 days. I couldn't pay the news to run a story for 4 days. And this is right when I'm starting to run. And I just knocked on doors. People didn't think I was a candidate. They were like, oh, well, you're an attorney? You're awfully young to be an attorney. One guy was like, well, you running for a cheerleader? Which I'm thinking, no. And also, you don't run for cheerleader. You don't knock on doors and ask people to vote for you to be a cheerleader. But it was hard. We just worked our butt off. My mom was my campaign momager. My twin sister was working like a dog. We had a well-known political family that was running. I mean, they just said we weren't going to win. They said, who is this girl with this funny sounding name? What's she up to? And we just worked hard. It doesn't matter what the wind and waves around you. You focus on your race. You focus on getting votes in there and connecting with people on values that are important to both. That was crazy. I enjoyed it though. I mean, I was scared to death at the time. When we got billboards, I was like, good God, I only paid for 1 month, okay, because we were on a budget. But the thing is, you know how in communities, people, if no one pays for the next month, that billboard will stay up there forever. And I'm thinking, if I lose, I'm gonna have to drive past this damn thing every day. And it's just like, oh gosh, this is gonna be awful. But fortunately we won. And my best friends from college had come down to help. And my sister, I cannot stress enough the importance of like my family, my mom, dad, and sister kind of just getting in there. I mean, we were riding around in a 1998 Expedition. If we saw you on the street, we were like, hey, can you vote? Well, I don't know. I think I'm registered. Well, come on, get in the car. We'll just take you down there and see. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's right. That's old fashioned
guerrilla tactics. Right. We had
yes.
community parades with our little whatever those things are that you amplifies your voice. It was crazy. It was wild.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Akbari. If we can give her some exclamation points in the chat to thank her for her time and energy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. A lot of folks are definitely like, can we reach out to her? So how can we follow you? Can you give us your social media? Folks want to engage with you.
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. What is it? Oh, Sen Akbari, S-E-N Akbari. Instagram, Ramesh Akbari. Instagram is the best one. It's more fun. Twitter is all retweets and seriousness. And tomorrow, y'all, they're voting to remove the bust of the first Grand Wizard of the KKK from our Capitol building. So I'll be all over that. So definitely follow. And Facebook, Ramesh Akbari. All right, thanks.
Yes, and we'll make sure to drop all of her handles in the chat. Thank you so much. And now we're gonna move on. Thank you, love you. All right, y'all.
Love you too.
So I hope y'all really enjoyed that. So we got a chance at, just as a quick recap, as Ramesh is taking down her screen and we're putting back up the PowerPoint. The purpose of today was for us to dig into state government, right? We learned a little bit that it's 3 branches of government and all of the different seats that sit underneath it, but also just centering ourselves that so much of our everyday life is controlled by state government. But we did all of this so that we had the language and the information to focus on the powers that the seat have for each election. Because once we're able to give folks the full picture of what the seat holds and what powers they have, and then connect it to how it influences their lives, connecting it back to voting makes it a lot easier. So I want to introduce you all to a framework that I created about a decade ago that we've used to train folks in about 40 states and different countries at this point. And it's called passion framing. And it's really easy. It's to 1, engage the issue area, 2, make the connection to the power of the seat, and then 3, get them to commit. So again, let's do an example. We talked about it a little earlier, right? But right now, I'm sure, have you all seen what happened in the news recently with ICE? That ICE is saying that international students at least have to take one in-person class, or they will either be sent home or detained. I know, it's ridiculous, right? So let's make some connections with ICE, right? So how do you feel about ICE? If I asked you, you see y'all are like, oh, this is so jacked up, this is horrible. Well, what if I told you that the President of the United States has the power to appoint the head of Homeland Security, which is where ICE sits? So ICE sits within Homeland Security. Do you think if someone made those connections, that would make you more inclined to participate? I see, yeah. I see some responses in the chat, absolutely. And then we get them to commit. We say, well, we need you to turn out this November, right? So again, thinking about some of the connections that we made earlier with COVID, like how do you feel that your state is reopened and now there's thousands of deaths in your community? Well, did you know the governor has the power to decide if our state reopens or not? And if you don't like it, you know, an election is coming up. So that's what we mean by connecting the issues, the everyday issues, back to the power of the seat. Because what we know for sure is just banking on, you know, a candidate that we like is not only unsustainable, but it doesn't allow us to do what Senator Egbari was telling us to do, hold our elected officials accountable. So does this framework make sense to you all? Yes? Oh, okay, I see a lot of yes. I'll make another connection to hype on what we talked about today. So, you know, how do you all feel, let's say you're in Georgia, about the state of, you know, the prisons in Georgia? How do you feel that 22 folks have been killed since the pandemic started? Well, did you know, here we go, connecting it back to the seat, that Governor Kemp has the power to appoint the head of corrections, who sets the regulations on how people that are incarcerated will, you know, operate during this pandemic. Well, if you don't like it, how about we turn out in November? That's a completely different conversation. And again, this is really helpful. As we said in the beginning, for a long time, we have been taught and conditioned that the issues that impact us every single day are separate from the political process, which keeps us further from participating. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the number one reason why folks did not participate was because we didn't like the candidates. And what that says to us is we didn't really understand how it connected to things that we were really upset about. So we know that voting is not an end all be all, but rather a necessary step to gaining the power that we need to achieve the vision that we have for our community. As one of our favorite partners, Woke Vote, based in Birmingham, Alabama, they said, voting is a comma and not a period. But we at YP4 say, voting is also an act of harm reduction. So one of the things you should know, we'll leave you with this analogy before Andrea comes back and close it up. Voting is like paying your light bill, right? Even in an inaction, there's a reaction. So if we decide to not participate or not pay our light bill for an election, there'll still be a reaction, i.e. the lights will go off. And we have to think about that in the same way as we vote. Every vote, every election is an opportunity to gain power. And the question is, are we gaining power for our communities, or is someone else gaining power at our expense? So with that, we're gonna jump to Andrea to go ahead and close us off.
All right, y'all. So before we close off, we wanna revisit the survey that you all took in the beginning. So give us a couple seconds of your time to go ahead and fill out the survey. We'll give you all about 10 seconds to fill out this first question. So now that we have gone through this training and talked about how power functions at the state level, and we've reviewed this framework, how do you all feel about this question? We'll give you all about 10 more seconds. All right, get your last votes in. Awesome, let's go ahead and end the poll. And let's launch the second one. So thinking about everything that we've gone through today, how likely are you to engage your community in the civic process? Be honest, y'all. We'll give you all about 10 more seconds. All right. Perfect. So let's go ahead and go to the next question. We'll give you all about the same amount of time. About 10 more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and close this poll. And the last question. Let's go ahead and launch that one. Give us some feedback, y'all. How do you all feel? Give y'all about 10 more seconds. Go ahead and get those last votes in. Awesome. Let's close this poll. So all of what we reviewed today is only one small piece of the puzzle. In order to truly understand the impact of elections and how they build off of each other, we must understand every level of government and how they interact. So in the next trainings of this series, we will actually be focusing on federal government. So 2 weeks ago, or last week was our local training. Today we've talked about power at the state level, and next week we're going to be talking about the federal level. And the week after that, we're going to be talking about how international governance interacts with all of these things. So make sure that you tune in. It's going to be next Wednesday and the Wednesday after at the same time. Remember that also all of these are going to culminate in our virtual civic engagement summit, which is going to be the first week of August. And we will be sending out all of the information to all of you that have registered so that you can attend and you can get a sneak peek at what is going to be happening. Make sure to follow us on social media to gain that information. This is our social media. Make sure to follow us and tag us in all of the things. As a reminder, we will be launching a giveaway of a really awesome sweatshirt from the Michelle Obama Becoming Tour. So if you want to participate and win this awesome t-shirt, all you have to do is go on your Instagram and record a video of yourself giving a reflection of what you learned in this training and what you're committed to doing, and tag us and tag 5 other friends. And all of the folks that do that, we are going to be raffling, and one person is going to be winning the sweatshirt. So get excited because it's really neat, and make sure to tell all of your friends to join the next training. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We will see you next week. Thanks, y'all.
I just took a DNA test, turns out I'm 100% that bitch, even when I'm crazy.
Thank y'all.
I got 4 problems, that's the human in me. Please.
Bye, y'all. See you next week. Same time, same channel.
Help you with your career. Just